All right, well, let's bring in Sean Hannity, our friend. He just spoke to President Trump last night, and he joins us now with more about that conversation. Good morning, Sean. What did the president tell you?
Good morning. Well, before I get to the president, I really was paying very close attention to everything that Jennifer Griffin was reporting here. The deception, the intelligence, the planning, the precision, the Tomahawks, the B-2s, the bunker buster bombs. If you just pause and think of the minutia, the level of detail, the precision, every American should be very proud today of every man and woman that works in our military and everybody that was part of the planning and an operation that took place so successfully last night. The fact that all of this went undetected. You can hear in the level of detail every single aspect of it. You hear danger. This was something I was warning about, Rachel, last week, that there is no military effort that does not have danger associated with it. I can add one little bit of context I can add to the specific detail that Jennifer went into, which was so comprehensive, and it should make, again, every American proud. But I can say they were really, if you listen to the president and listen very closely to what he has been saying, Iran cannot have nuclear weapons. He said last night, now you have another opportunity for peace. You did not take the first opportunity. And part two of our military operation is to protect American assets in the region. That was well underway, under the radar, long before anybody even got there. There were people that were being removed from the region. Fortification of certain places were taking place. And I think the president was very clear that the consequences would be devastating and severe. He said we already took out the hard targets, and they are certainly vulnerable in terms of the entire economy of Iran is based on their selling of oil. So a lot of those oil refineries are in one particular area. Their power grid could be taken out. Compared to the operation last night, this would be a layup. And the president, he stated his objectives. His objectives were fulfilled last night. Now, the Israelis, they have a different objective because they're the ones that have been taking on through Iran directly and their proxies hundreds of thousands of missiles being fired into their towns, their communities, and their cities. And I would not be surprised at all if the Israelis decided at some point that they wanted to go after that targets. But the president was clear in terms of what American interests were, America first, America's agenda. And he has been very, very consistent in terms of his ideology, philosophy, in terms of this national security of our country. And I think he shows that consistency here.
Yeah, Sean, to your point, Pete Hegseth, Secretary Hegseth, saying today about President Trump, quote, he seeks peace in Iran, should take that path. We have just a little bit of Hegseth's comments I'd like to play for you, Sean, and that is where he's making the point that basically only President Trump could have gotten this done. Watch here.
Many presidents have dreamed of delivering the final blow to Iran's nuclear program, and none could until President Trump. The operation President Trump planned was bold, and it was brilliant, showing the world that American deterrence is back. When this president speaks, the world should listen, and the U.S. military, we can back it up.
Sean, your thoughts?
Griff, by the way, good to see all of you. I'm watching every weekend, so I feel like I'm just having coffee with my friends on the weekend. But in all seriousness, you know, Pete is 1,000% right. I mean, we can take this back to 1979. Griff, our mutual friend, Colonel Oliver North, actively involved in operations with Iran. He went there. He had a suicide pill with him. No president has been able to deal a blow like this to the #1 state sponsor of terror. Here's the president's calculation. It's not that complicated if you listen to what he says. And I urge everybody to hear him when he speaks. He says Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. If you go back in time, and he's been saying that since 2011. Okay, he has said it consistently. He gave them a 60-day window. And then He said, "Are you sure? Because it's going to be bad." He gives them up to 2 more weeks. The day after, that was Thursday. On Friday, you have the Iranian foreign minister said, no, they're not going to be involved in any conversations. And then last night happens. But it is consistent with what the president has done. I know a lot of people want to discuss and talk about or relitigate Iraq and Afghanistan. Well, we can relitigate one part of Afghanistan, and that's when Donald Trump dropped the mother of all bombs on Afghanistan. We can relitigate how to deal with Iran in the past, and the Iranians could have learned something when General Soleimani was taken off that tarmac and that terror threat was removed. We could have learned something when President Trump took out Baghdadi and associates, and we really could have learned a lot if we watched President Trump. Remember, under Obama and Biden, the ISIS caliphate built up. It was a clear and present danger to the world. And Donald Trump systematically wiped them out step by step. He walked them back, and the ISIS caliphate ceases to exist. Now, what's fascinating is what's going to happen next. Clearly, our military, our Pentagon, is prepared for any possible retaliation. But the message has been sent, like the message was sent before last night. The message before last night was, you can't have a nuclear weapon. Take a peaceful solution. We are offering you a pathway towards such. Part 2 of that is, if you attack any assets of the United States of America in the region, we will overwhelmingly devastate you. I would argue, off the top of my head, probably the first 2 targets would be refineries, their electric grid that is run by gas, and probably, if we know, as the president had stated last week, where the supreme leader is, the rest or the remaining leadership, because the Israelis had already wiped out most of it to begin with. But a message has been sent to the world. The Trump doctrine is very different, very unique than any other president in the history of this country. And I think he has proven that you can successfully take out and neutralize threats in the world without getting involved in forever wars. I think he's proven that once again. It doesn't mean that there's still not we're in danger. You know, Joe Biden and Kamala allowed, you know, known terrorists into our country, so we have to be on the watch right now.
You know, Sean, Pete Hegseth said that Donald Trump, or President Trump, effectively obliterated Iran's nuclear ambitions, and I think that that's fair to say. We obviously we need to see more things that come out of the site and how much, but it appears that that is what has happened, and that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. I agree with you. I believe that Donald Trump, President Trump, is a lot different than any other Republicans, and he's the master negotiator. He's extended the olive branch, if you will, to the Iranian regime and said, let's have peace. But what about Israel's ambitions for regime change? Can that also be curtailed in order to get that peace negotiation and end things so that it doesn't expand?
Well, the president was clear, too, last night that maybe like never before have 2 countries been able to coordinate and work together to create an atmosphere where America had the greatest odds of success to pull off what Jennifer Griffin described as one of the most complicated and sophisticated and absolutely brilliant military efforts in the last number of decades. I don't know. I can't think of an operation that has been this big, this wide, this successful. As others have said, past presidents wanted to do it. My conversation with the president last night, he was very sober. He did start giving me some of the details just as I was coming on the air. Literally, I walked into my studio about 1 minute, less than 1 minute, because I've been, conversing with him, and gave me some of the details. Now that we have more details this morning, wow, I'm kind of blown away. I am impressed beyond words of the efforts of our military. I'm very proud of them. I'm very grateful to them. And I'm glad this was a huge success. And I will say this to the mullahs in Iran and the supreme leader in Iran: if you are foolish enough not to listen to him this time, you won't have a country by the end of this.
I think that's clear.
They'd be wise to heed his words this time.
Largest B-2 operational strike in history, second longest in history, the longest since 9/11. You can watch Hannity weekdays, 9 p.m. Sean Hannity, as always, a pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Sean.
Thanks,
you,
guys.
Sean.
And I hate that picture. Who put that picture up? That picture's terrible.
It was Griff. He does all the graphics.
Thanks, Sean.
Very good.
All right, great show, guys.
Hey, it's Will Kane. Click here to subscribe to the Fox News channel on YouTube. It's the best way to get our latest interviews and highlights. And click to subscribe to the Will Kane podcast for full episodes right now.